I grew up indoctrinated in an evangelical, fundamentalist Christian megachurch, and I get asked all the time, how did I escape? The more I learn about how the evangelical Christian church in the United States operates, the more I commend myself and others for getting the hell out of there. But the reality is, it wasn't easy. It took a lot of courage, curiosity, and most importantly, critical thinking. And not everyone has the mental bandwidth or even the time to seriously challenge the belief systems they've been taught since birth. It is possible though, and that's what I want to talk about in this episode of The Kayse Melone Show. Welcome back to The Kayse Melone Show. My name is Kayse Melone, and I'm so glad you're here. I've talked a lot on this show about the fact that I have left the evangelical Christian church after spending 21 years in it, and today I want to go into a little bit more depth. Because escaping that level of indoctrination was hard, it's true, but if I don't keep sharing my story, then I can't expect others to challenge the same belief system they were raised in. Because again, the more I learn about how the evangelical Christian church in the United States is run, the more I understand some of the political maneuvers that were manufactured behind the scenes in order to shape the specific voting patterns of the evangelical Christian church. All of the politics, all of the power, all of the money, all of the control. The more I genuinely marvel that I got out at all, okay? I mean, we were in it. This wasn't just go to church on Sundays and move on with your life kind of Christianity that I was personally raised in. This was a full-blown, all-encompassing, 7 days a week, tithe 10% of your income, purity ring on your finger, youth group on Wednesday, all of it kind of thing. And back then, when I was in middle school and high school, going to the Bible-based private school affiliated with that megachurch, I didn't question anything. Why would I? It was all I knew, all I was supposed to know. And so I still hold a lot of sympathy for people who were still raised in that environment. But now that I'm on these sides of the conversations, I am so frustrated with the result, the manifestation of these belief systems and how these voting patterns that have been manipulated within the Christian church have led to serious material issues that are affecting the lives of everyday people, not just in the United States, but as we'll talk about later, throughout the entire rest of the world. So looking back, it's wild to realize how much of my identity was shaped, was conditioned before I ever had the chance to consciously participate in it. Because I was told before I knew how to even ask the question, who is Kayse, right? I was told about truth, and that is one thing that really high demand religions are really good at. They're really good at framing truth as an absolute truth, at telling the constituents about what the truth is before these people could even know that truth is something that you can investigate, right? It's not that I just believed in absolute truth. It's not just that I believed in God. I believed in a very specific absolute truth. I believed in a very specific God, right? It's the absolute truth that was specifically translated to me by the religious pastors in my church. And I believed in a very specific version of God, a God who loved me unconditionally, who and in reality ended up, according to a lot of interpretations, loved me conditionally, as long as I didn't have sex before marriage, as long as I, evangelized and all of these things. And I get a lot of feedback all of the time from progressive Christians who say, no, that's not the real kind of relationship with God. Real Christianity is not about works, it's about faith. And to that I always say, then why do you care how other people live their lives? Because for a Christian to say that the real kind of Christianity only has to do with a relationship with divinity. I love that concept. I love the idea of a relationship with divinity. I don't believe in divinity, but that's fine. If Christians want to tell me that their religion is only about a relationship with Jesus and not about good works or acts or actions, then why do they care so much about homosexuality? Why do they care so much about how other people choose to identify or live their lives as long as they're not harming other people? Because in that sense, yeah, it's a very specific version of a God who loves us conditionally, apparently. And the God that I believed in, that I was taught about, did want us to suppress our desires, our doubts, and honestly, our critical thinking so that we never questioned the authority in the church. And that's why I talk about politics and religion at the same time a lot, because on my podcast, on my channel, I think that it's important to always recognize the easily entangled institutions of religion and political parties, okay? Because that is what we're seeing on the religious right. And there's a really good documentary that I'll recommend called the Bad Faith documentary. It is about Christian nationalism. It goes into a lot of detail about how the Council for National Policy was created specifically in mind with was created specifically with a theocracy in mind, was created specifically to merge church and state. Okay. And that's something that I didn't realize growing up in the evangelical Christian church. That's something that I would have pushed back on at the time and being like, no, this isn't a political community. This is a faith-based community is what I would have said. This is about Jesus. This isn't about voting power or whatever. But when you look at a lot of the strings that were pulled behind the scenes in the past several decades of political leaders like Paul Weyrich, who teamed up with televangelists and like celebrity pastors and the bigger names of leaders of megachurches throughout the United States, you can see the patterns of them putting a lot of money into the psychological manipulation of the church congregation in order to manipulate their voting patterns. So when I talk about both politics and religion, you have to understand that technically, according to the law, a pastor of a 501c3 nonprofit, I think it's a 501c3, is not legally allowed to endorse a political candidate or endorse a specific political party from the pulpit. However, there are plenty of ways to get around that. There are plenty of ways. I promise you, growing up in the evangelical Christian church, I promise you that as far as the actual issues at hand, the actual political topics and subjects, okay, those were 100% talked about, and not just talked about in an informative way, but shaped in a moral way, shaped in a way that made it very clear that voting a certain way was considered to be more righteous. And that is what is really insidious about the conservative Christian indoctrination that is happening in this country. That is why I talk about both politics and religion, because for me and for thousands of other people across this country, they are the same thing. And for that and many other reasons, leaving the evangelical Christian church, escaping those thought patterns that were actively manufactured in order for people to vote a certain way to keep Christian conservative leaders in power by voting patterns, right? The active indoctrination, leaving that Christian conservative environment, the far right as it has become, because when you combine fundamentalist religion like fundamentalist Christianity in evangelical culture with an authoritarian political machine, you get fascism. Hi, welcome to it. Wake up, babe. New fascism just dropped. Do you understand? So leaving that mentality, leaving that worldview, I am talking about all of the time because it was not easy. I'm trying to connect with the people who are starting to realize that the environment they're in, they're looking around and they're seeing all of these belief patterns. They're seeing all of these messages from the pulpit, and they're starting to clue in on the fact that, oh, it's not just the political system that's corrupt that needs the swamp drained, if you feel me. I actually don't like what you're preaching. I actually think that maybe this religion, this whole organized religion thing is also about control and profit over people and issues that I take a moral stance on. And in a way that is not being dictated from the pulpit. And they're starting to look around and they're starting to wonder. I am here to connect with those people and tell you that it is possible. It is possible to leave and have a very fulfilling life, to have a very ethically sound life, to feel more aligned with the morality that the religious leaders would like you to believe is only possible if you listen to exactly what they say and vote in the exact manner that they tell you to. Okay? So When I talk about leaving the evangelical Christian church, I'm going to be honest, it was not easy. And I say that as someone who has been on the other side, who drew very real value from the community that I was raised in and being socialized from a young age with all of my friends who went to the same school and the same church. After I left, after I am now on the other side of these conversations, it took a long time to get here. It took a long time to get here, and I was very alone throughout that process. And that's another reason I do this kind of work, because I want to connect with people who maybe feel alone and let them know that there are plenty of people who have deconstructed from high demand religions like Christianity, from the political indoctrination that goes hand in hand with evangelical Christianity in the United States. I'm here to tell you, from someone who has rebuilt her entire worldview without relying on a single Bible verse or scripture or promise of heaven. It wasn't easy, but it is so worth it. The reality is, when you're raised in a high control religious environment, your beliefs aren't just ideas. They become the infrastructure that can be used against you. They're how you make sense of everything, right? So suffering, morality, love, who you are, and why you matter. Pulling at the thread of doubt about those concepts stops becoming a theological disagreement for a lot of people who are ready to question leaving the evangelical Christian church. It goes beyond a theological conversation. It's about risking your entire emotional ecosystem, your entire identity. And I have to recognize that many people don't have the bandwidth for that. Honestly, I barely did. And that's something that I have deep empathy for. Not everyone has the time or the safety or the capacity to question the belief systems that they've been handed since they were toddlers in the church nursery memorizing Bible verses for candy. Okay? Not everyone has the privilege to take a step back and ask, wait, why do I believe this? Especially when their housing, their relationships, or their entire support system depend on keeping those beliefs intact, okay? Because a deconstruction journey from high demand religion requires more than intelligence. It requires a level of disruption and de-identification. So I talk all the time about how being non-religious is in many ways a privilege. And don't get me wrong, whenever we do walk away from these religions, there is a lot of grief there. There's a lot of anger that's totally understandable. And there's it's a never ending process. I'm still even navigating some personal trauma, religious trauma that I have to deal with. There are still days when I feel unmoored in a sense, but there's also a lot of clarity. There's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of liberation. There comes the peace with the fact that I can wake up and know that my morality isn't set in stone based on a book written by some men thousands of years ago. My morality can evolve as I evolve and interact with more people and am challenged by the multiplicity of the human experience. And also on this side of leaving the evangelical Christian church, there's the simple beauty of realizing that I'm enough. Okay, not because I'm forgiven by some celestial judge, but because I exist, because I am human, because I am here. And I think now I can be very excited about the fact that I believe that every human deserves the dignity of being alive and being treated as fairly as everyone else. I think that I really appreciate one of my favorite parts about leaving the evangelical Christian church is that I no longer feel like an inherent sinner, okay? Because I think that is a very harmful narrative. I think that it's awesome not to feel like I'm impure for having human urges. I think it's awesome that I don't pretend to have all of the answers because I've read the Bible. And it's not just about, I don't mean I don't have all of the answers, so I just have faith that God does. I don't have all of the answers and I don't need them. And I am fine with always questioning and looking for the truth from a skeptical, curious perspective of navigating this reality without pretending, again, like some old-ass book, some dusty-ass book has all the answers. So when I tell my story, when I when I speak about what it means to leave the Christian church, it's not about convincing anyone else to do the same. I do want to clarify that. I'm trying to validate the people who are already on their way out. Okay, I'm not trying to deconvert anyone. I'm not trying to reverse evangelize. I'm here to connect with the people who are scared of leaving altogether the Christian church or are confused and wondering if they're not alone. I want to speak to those people and tell them that you are part of a growing movement of people who are waking up to the fact that belief without questioning isn't faith, it's indoctrination. That's why I say I may not have all of the answers, but I am fine with constantly being critical and questioning the best way to do things and not just rely on the answer that, oh, well, we've always thought this, so that's what we'll always think. And I also want to make clear that the Christian church in the United States is not just a matter of personal spirituality. It's not. In the United States, the Christian church is a political institution. It is the intertwining of church and state. It is a cultural empire. It is a force that has shaped policy. It is about controlling narratives. It is about justifying oppression. Okay, and so walking away from evangelical Christianity is actually not just about personal liberation. I was talking about that a minute ago and how on the individual level, there is a lot of benefit to leaving the Christian church, but it is also a collective act of resistance that all of us are doing this together. And that's really important to me because there are so many harmful narratives within the evangelical Christian church that harm more than just the people within the church. It harms the people outside of the Christian church. It harms the LGBTQ community members who are discriminated against and villainized and hated. It harms women because according to the Christian Bible, women have to subjugate themselves for men and submit to their authority in the household, whatever the fuck that means. It is harmful because Christian nationalism in the United States goes hand in hand with white supremacist narratives that back up decades ago was backed up by the desire for racial segregation and power over each other, power over people of color. And also, what is very important and what I'd really like to get across here, the evangelical Christian church in the United States is harmful for the individuals involved because, again, it holds you back from critical thinking. It limits you because you can only have so much questioning before you're told to stop questioning and just have faith. You'll never be able to meet your true potential in the Christian church because you always have to adhere to the religious doctrine that other people are telling you is moral or righteous or whatever, instead of finding your own personal alignment with morality in a very murky and difficult world to navigate, in which we all have to recognize we have to come together as a consensus in order to establish moral principles that evolve with us. A great example being that human sacrifice used to be considered moral. There are a lot of things that used to be considered moral that we have evolved beyond. And if you have this mentality that morality is absolute and it never needs to evolve, you're not just holding everyone else back, you're holding yourself back, okay? So there are so many ways that evangelical Christianity is harmful for the individual, but it's also harmful for other people in this country who because of how evangelical Christian narratives thrive on divisive rhetoric and saying us versus them and believers versus non-believers and so many other uses of divisive language in order to prop up essentially straight white evangelical Christians above all others. All of those are really terrible aspects of evangelical Christianity, but as I always say, the most horrific manifestation of white evangelical Christianity in the United States is the adherence to the biblical literalist interpretation of the book of Revelation in relation to Armageddon and the end times, to the point where, according to so many interpretations of that, again, old-ass book, the statehood of Israel is required for Jesus to come back and rapture all of the true believers of Christianity into heaven. And for that to happen, the statehood of Israel is a requirement and needs to be defended at all costs. And this results in middle schoolers and high schoolers and adults around this country being indoctrinated with the explicit language of telling them they need to call themselves a Zionist, a Christian Zionist, in order to be righteous. And that results, the most horrific manifestation of evangelical Christianity as a result of all of that is the genocidal, occupying apartheid state of Israel, the genocidal acts against the Palestinians. So you want to talk about all of the reasons to escape evangelical Christianity. If that violence done in the name of your belief system is not enough, I honestly don't know what the fuck to tell you. So all of that to say, walking away is not just about the individuals. It is about something much bigger. And there are many reasons that people leave the evangelical Christian church. The title of this segment is How to Escape Evangelical Christianity. And as much as I would love to give you a 3-step framework, the reality is it is not a single decision. It is a long process, and it is different for everyone. I can tell you some of the ways that people in my life, some of the people who are part of this community that I'm building here, have shared the stories that they have shared about their deconstruction and what got them to wake up and stop being fooled by evangelical Christian rhetoric. For myself, it was a long journey of reading. So I'm a big reader, and some of the books that I started reading, and I talk about this in other videos and other YouTube videos and other podcast episodes. The books I was reading at one point when I was already kind of questioning my faith, when I was already kind of disconnected from the evangelical Christian church, really sparked my understanding that the Bible is not as divinely inspired as I thought. But what I want to point out there is I was already a little bit disconnected from the specific community, the same people that I had grown up with, I'm talking like 100 people max that I had surrounded my entire first 20 years of my life. The entire first 20 years of my life, I was around these same several dozen people. So it's very easy to get lost in a doctrine like I was, because I was never challenged with the multiplicity of perspectives. I was never challenged with other cultural ideologies, with other points of views, with other belief systems. And so one aspect of escaping evangelical Christianity, and honestly the far right, is an intentional, good faith approach to understanding perspectives that you weren't raised in, okay? Or cultures that you weren't raised in, okay? And what I mean by good faith is not consuming content of people who disagree with you solely for the sake of debunking them or solely for the sake of proving them wrong, but really listening to the messages of people who have different stories than you, who are very much raised in an environment removed from yours. I think that once you start seeing and having a little bit more empathy for, oh, maybe this person isn't an evangelical Christian like I am because of X, Y, and Z. As soon as you start to be open to some of those other kinds of narratives, and then you take it a step further, and you really just give yourself some time and space from constantly consuming the Bible and the Christian narrative, which is a really big part of how the indoctrination works, right? It's the idea of reading your Bible every day makes you more righteous. It's the idea of going to church every single Sunday is how you stay involved in the community, right? But take even 1 month off of all of that. I would love to challenge Christians to do that. Take 1 month without reading your Bible. Honestly, if your God is so unconditionally loving and so willing to save you, like you don't even have to change your belief for a single month. You can still believe that Jesus died on the cross to save your sins for a whole month. But I'm challenging you to spend an entire month consuming content that isn't Christian. Okay, not going to church. It doesn't have to be dramatic. I'm just challenging you. That would be a great start to breaking out of the very intentional and proven time and time again to exist indoctrination. So that's kind of the best actual advice that I can give you, because it really just looks different for everyone. And that's kind of a hard part to realize, but if you're at the point where something doesn't sit right and there's something about the environment that's nagging at you, maybe it's how women are treated, maybe it's the way you have started to befriend a gay person in your community, like at school or whatever. Maybe it's maybe you start to realize how church leaders have covered up for predators or have gaslit people out of their trauma for time immemorial at this point. Or maybe you're just in a moment of prayer and it goes on a little too long and you realize that no one's answering, that little voice in the back of your head might just be yourself, right? Whatever it is, there are so many different like capital M moments that people realize that they might not be a Christian anymore. That moment starts the deconstruction journey, right? And once it starts, it's pretty hard to stop. The only way to stop it is if you literally just say, no, I choose not to pursue this line of questioning. That is the nature of faith. Faith is the evidence of things hoped for. What is it? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So guess what? I just remembered a Bible verse, even though I haven't opened a Bible in over a decade. So if you're worried you'll forget all of that stuff you've been taught your whole life, I am proof that you will not. You will not lose all of the knowledge you have. You will expand on it. You will realize that there is more to the evangelical Christianity that you were raised in. The fact that I remember that scripture should be proof, okay? But I encourage you to start questioning everything. And I want to say this for everyone. Like this moment, whatever the moment is when you realize you're not a Christian anymore, I promise you it is a moment of liberation. And it's not easy. It's not easy to get there because the system of belief is designed to make you feel like the problem when that happens. It is designed to make you feel like your doubt is a sin, that questioning is rebellion, okay? That if something doesn't sit right, it's your heart or the devil that is being deceitful, not the ideology or the institution. So when you start to pull away, the church gaslights you and says you're just hurt, you're backsliding, you're being deceived by demonic forces, and all of this stuff, and that it's really important. It is really important to recognize that those responses are not about you at all. They don't care about you. This is about the system trying to keep itself intact. So if you grew up in high control Christianity, whether it was evangelical, it was Catholicism, fundamentalism, or something adjacent, leaving is not just changing your mind, it is expanding, but it's also grieving. Like, it's okay to mourn the version of your life that might be gone. I still mourn for the community that I have left behind. Even if that community was conditional, and once I left the evangelical Christian faith and was public about it, my people who I had grown up with my whole life, who were supposed to have my back no matter what, all of a sudden literally blocked me on social media and called me crazy and stopped inviting me out and all of these things because I started believing differently. I am here to tell you that you are allowed to be pissed off. You are allowed to scream into the void about how much it hurts. But I want to challenge us to eventually come back around and do the even harder thing and rebuild, okay? Because when we leave the church, it's not just a loss of belief system, it is a loss of identity. I had to relearn how to make decisions without consulting the Bible. Again, I haven't opened it in a decade, and I haven't done anything terrible like commit mass murder, so I would just like to throw that out there. Guess what? I can be fairly moral without the Bible. The reality is, like, when you take God out of the equation, or just Christianity out of the equation, the moral weight of your decisions actually increase because it is all on you. You have to come to terms with your own critical thinking and what you think is or isn't moral without being told from a book. It's not about following commandments. It's about checking internally what is or isn't moral in your mind. And that's why I say it becomes a liberating process because you're actually becoming more aligned with who you actually are. And so that is one of the most important aspects of leaving the evangelical Christian church. Again, there's no one way to leave the evangelical Christian church. Some people just ghost it. Some people just one day stop going and never say anything. Others, like myself, make a public declaration, kind of like on Facebook. Public declaration, it was Facebook, but whatever. Some people take a long time to disentangle. Others walk away in one clean break. Some people keep in touch with some of their family members who are still Christian. And what matters is that you are walking in the direction of your own truth and what actually matters to you. And again, this goes back to being aligned with who you truly are, right? That you are honoring the questions that brought you here in the first place, that you are brave enough to imagine a life that isn't governed by fear of hell, shame for having human urges, or the control of your thought patterns and therefore voting habits, okay? So I want to speak directly to anyone watching this who is kind of questioning about being raised in the evangelical Christian church. There's a weird liminal space where you're not sure if you believe in God, the Christian God anymore, but you're still afraid of hell, okay? Where you've stopped going to church, but you still feel guilty about it. And I want to challenge you with the idea of if you're still afraid of hell, and that's why you're scared of taking that step when it comes to leaving evangelical Christianity. Do you not see how maybe teaching people, imagine you were going to build a religion. Don't you think that maybe one of the easiest way to keep people in your religion, to keep people tithing and aligned with the values and morality that you proclaim to be the most righteous, wouldn't it be kind of really intelligent to create this concept of an eternal hell where someone will spend forever in pain? Wouldn't that be an interesting way to keep people in your religion? I just want to challenge you to consider why you believe in hell in the first place, because I know you weren't born thinking that. I know that you weren't born with an awareness of hell actually existing. You were taught about it. And I want you to challenge yourself why you were taught that, okay? At the end of the day, leaving the Christian church is not a betrayal of your upbringing. It is a reclamation of your own agency. It is saying, I get to decide what's true for me. It is about refusing to live a life dictated by guilt for being an inherently sinful person, okay? That's another way that evangelical Christianity keeps you indoctrinated, by convincing you that you are inherently sinful and that you need the salvation and the constant repetitive atonement that you can only one way, the truth and the life, you feel me, participate in by worshiping this guy named Jesus, okay? That internal belief that there is something wrong with you that needs to be saved, guess what? You don't have to believe like that. You don't, okay? So I understand that questioning all of these aspects, challenging the system of belief that you have been taught is hard. It's lonely and it's confusing. But again, it's also very liberating. And the farther you walk, the more you realize you're not walking away from something, you're walking towards something else. That is even in the concept of what it means to be a conservative. That is conserving the past and holding on true to tradition. And the reality is when you walk away from that, because again, conservatism and Christianity go hand in hand in the United States, okay? When you walk away from that, you are moving toward progress. That is why often the reverse of that is called progressive. You know, like a progressive society, because we're looking at the future and how we can evolve and be better. That independence from the belief from the past, it is a rebellion, but it is also a growth. It is a rebellion against the past. So in that way, like the past still matters, but it is about growing into a better version of yourself. And therefore, since you're not being manipulated in how to vote, you can decide with other people who have broken free from these manipulative systems of belief. You can decide all together through an actual consensus, democracy, anyone, how to build something better. Because if you really, really believe that governments of the past are perfect, honestly, I don't know what to tell you, but I don't think you do, because I didn't even believe that when I was an evangelical Christian. I just didn't want to rock the boat and go against everyone else that I was around. And I just want to wrap up with the disclaimer I always make. that I am not trying to bash everyday Christians. This is not some kind of smear campaign against your aunt who volunteers at the food pantry or your childhood friend who still posts Bible verses on Instagram. Like, I challenge the system. I challenge the institution, the centuries old, the millennia old machine known as the Christian church that continues day in and day out to cause real harm to real people with real consequences. And the fact is, if we don't start naming that clearly, unapologetically, and publicly, like I'm trying to do, we are going to keep watching history repeat itself in increasingly violent, increasingly authoritarian ways. So I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm also not trying to necessarily be polite. The Christian church is not neutral. It is not merely a cultural artifact or a community space. It is a global power structure that has shaped everything from colonial empires to modern politics to Christian Zionism, and it continues to wield that power, often in the most regressive and not progressive, oppressive and not liberating ways. So if we are going to build a better, more just, more equitable, liberated world, we have got to be willing to walk away from the past. Okay? No more. I go back and forth on whether or not I want to tiptoe around evangelical Christians' feelings, but the reality is I'm not talking to the evangelical Christian who in their life will just never leave. I'm talking to the people who are questioning. I'm talking to the people who are ready to break free. And I promise you, it is possible. It is better. It is a more fulfilling life on this side, both for yourself as an individual, and I'm just going to be real. The more people we can get out of evangelical Christianity, the better this country will be for the entirety of humankind, for your own mental health and the material conditions for the entirety of humankind. So that's what I wanted to leave you with today. There are a lot of ways to break free from the evangelical Christian church. That is why I talk about this every Sunday on the Kayse Melone Show podcast and every day live streaming on YouTube and Twitch. That is why I am building this community. And that is why I am having success building this community, because people are waking up to the fact that the church in the United States is being used as a mechanism of control. And I'm tired of it. I'm fucking tired of it. I'm over it. I want better for the individuals, and I want better for the rest of the world who is suffering on behalf of these people who are being lied to in the evangelical Christian church, the white evangelical Christian church specifically. With that, I will leave you to it. Thank you for being here. I look forward to more conversations like this. All right. So thank you. Be well, make choices, and I will see you soon.